Okay, today we're going to talk about factoring polynomials when the coefficient of a is equal to 1. We're going to use the reverse box method that we used when we divided polynomials. So our we will statement, we will factor possible trinomials with real factors in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, including perfect square trinomials of degree 2. So we're just going to get started here. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to look at our final answer. This would be what was in the first parentheses when we divided polynomials. The only difference is we are not given the second parentheses, so we do not know what makes up our rows. That is something we're going to have to figure out. We're also going to have to figure out the terms that make the columns on our box. The only thing we have to work with is our final answer, what we would get when we multiply, when we fill in our boxes and combine like terms. That's what we're going to use, and we're going to work backwards from there. To get started, you're going to take your lead term of your dividend and you're going to put it in the top left box just like we did with division. So I'm going to put m squared. And then I'm going to fill in the bottom right box, which is the same box that we filled in with our final term of our dividend when our remainder was 0. And your remainder will be 0 with these problems because factoring trinomials, we don't have any remainders. And now I'm going to use some of my knowledge about multiplying to help me fill in my first column and top row factors. So I've got to think, what times what is going to fill in this box with m squared? And hopefully you said m. M times m is going to make m squared. And now I just have to figure out what is going to fill in my second row factor and my second column factor. And this is where we're going to go back to our dividend, our final answer, and we're going to use the coefficients. The coefficients are how many of each term we have. So the a term, that is going to be your squared term, m squared, x squared, p squared, n squared. So you're going to ask yourself, how many m squareds do we have here? How many of these do we have? And hopefully you're going to say 1 because there's an invisible 1 there. So our coefficient of a is 1. Your b term coefficient is going to be the middle term of your trinomial, or the m to the 1 power, x to the 1 power. How many m's do we have? 2, and it is a positive, so I'm going to include that sign with my 2. And then your coefficient of c is your constant. It's your number. It's the term that has no variable included with it. And so the value of the c coefficient of the c term is negative 24. And now we're going to use these coefficients to now find factors. These factors are going to help us complete a little puzzle that will then tell us what is going to fill in our boxes. So that's why we need these coefficients. First thing we've got to do is a times c and find those factors of a times c. Well, I know the value of a is 1 and the value of c is negative 24, so that product is negative 24. And now you're going to need your calculator. And the reason you're going to need your calculator is because you are going to need to find the list of all the numbers, pairs, that multiply to make negative 24. And the easiest way to do this is with your calculator, just to be sure you don't leave any pairs out. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to write the steps for you first, and then we're going to use our calculator. These are very short, easy steps to remember, and it's very helpful. Sometimes you'll need to do this, sometimes you won't. You may be able to think of all the factors on your own. But if you get stuck, this is kind of handy to know how to use your calculator to help you out. So to find the factors, we're simply going to press y equals. Then we're going to type in whatever value we got when we multiplied our a and c coefficient numbers. I didn't want to put negative 24 because it's not always going to be that value. So you type in your product of a and c, and you push divided by x. It will always be divided by x. And then you're going to go to second graph because that's going to take you to a table, which is what we're going to fill in. We're filling in a factor table. So let's do those steps in my calculator. I'm going to go to y equals. I'm going to type in our factor. I'm going to type in the positive We'll talk about this negative in just a second, but I'm going to use positive. Divided by x in second graph. Now, here's what we're looking for in our calculators table. We are looking for whole numbers. I am not saying that your factors will never be decimals. All I'm saying is that for right now, for these examples, until you get the hang of this, we are going to ignore any factors that are not whole numbers. So obviously we cannot use 0 and error because error is not a value. So we're going to go to the next list, 1 and 24. 2 and 12. Because 2 times 12 makes 24. 3 and 8. 4 and 6. Now, I've put a sample table. We may have more factor pairs. We may have less. This is just an idea to get us started. So now I look at the next factor pair that I might need to add to my list, and I've got 5 and 4 and 8/10. That is a decimal. We are not going to include that factor pair in our list of factors. And the next factor pair is 6 and 4. When you notice that your two factor pairs switch columns, so your x value becomes your y and your y value becomes your x, you don't have to repeat and list those repeating factor pairs. So we are done with our calculator. We're going to move this to the side. And we're now going to move to our x puzzle. Here's where these factors come into play. They're going to help us figure out this puzzle. And we're going to fill in the different parts of our x. In the top of the x, we're going to write that product of a and c, so negative 24. And we are going to want to include the sign this time because it is going to play an important role. And then underneath our product of a and c coefficients, we're going to write our b coefficient. And for this problem, it is 2, and it is a positive 2. And now I'm going to use my list of factors to figure out two numbers that when multiplied will make negative 24 and when added together make a positive 2. So let's think, 1 and 24. So I'm going to use my calculator. So 1 plus 24. Nope. 1 plus a negative 24. I'm going to look at all the different combinations. Negative 1 plus 24. So I switched. I made each number negative. Now I'm going to make them both negative. And I'm never getting to a sum of positive 2. So 1 and 24 don't work. I'm going to mark them out of my factor list because they're not going to work for me. Now I'm going to do the same thing with 2 and 12. 2 plus 12. 14. Negative 2 plus 12. 10. 2 plus negative 12. Negative 10. Negative 2 plus negative 12. Negative 14. That will not work. So now I'm going to do 3 plus 8. Nope. 3 plus negative 8. Negative 5. Negative 3 plus 8. 5. I'm close, but I need to be at a positive 2. And negative 3 plus negative 8. Negative 11. That's not going to work. So it's got to be 6 and 4. So let's try. 6 plus 4. That's going to make 10. Negative 6 plus 4. Oh, that's close. Negative 2. So let me try to switch the signs. 6 plus negative 4. That works. 6 and negative 4. So I'm going to write 6 and 4, and the 4 has to be the negative because 6 times negative 4 does make negative 24, and we just saw that the sum of 6 and negative 4 is 2. So these are our two answers. So now what we're going to do is these values are now going to come down into our table. And remember from dividing that our diagonal boxes have to be like terms. And remember, they have to add together to create the next term, which is going to be 2m. These have to add to make 2m. So 6m and 4m. That should be negative 4m. Are going to go in the boxes because when I add them together, I get a positive 2, and they have to have m so that they can be like terms to make 2m. So now I'm going to use my knowledge of division, and I'm going to work backwards. Well, m times what is going to make 6m? That would be a positive 6. And what times m is going to make a negative 4m? That would be a negative 4. And now I'm going to check my multiplication for this last box. Does negative 4 times 6 make negative 24? Yes, it does. So now I have all my boxes filled in. Now I'm ready to write my final answer. And my final answer is simply what multiplies together to make m squared plus 2m minus 24. And it's going to be what are the terms of our rows and what are the terms of our columns. So the first parentheses is going to be m plus 6. And the second parentheses is going to be m minus 4. And those are the factors. This is what multiplies to make our trinomial. All right, let's go over to the back. Our next example. We've got n squared plus 4n minus 12. Well, just like from the front, we are going to highlight our lead term, and that is going to go in the top left box, n squared. And we've got our last term, our constant, which is going to go in the bottom right box because we have 0 as our remainder, so we will not need another column. And I know from multiplication that something times something makes n squared, and it's going to be n. And now I'm going to fill in my coefficients. Remember, a is the x term, so how many n squareds do we have? Just one. B is going to be our n term. How many n's do we have? We have positive 4. And our c is just our constant, the term without a variable, and that is negative 12. And so now I want to find my factors of the product of a and c. So 1 times negative 12 is negative 12. And now I'm going to go to my calculator. I'm going to clear out the memory. I'm going to go to y equals, just like on the front, and I'm going to type in 12 divided by x. And I'm going to use the positive just so when I'm trying to think of addition in a moment, I won't confuse myself. So the sign when you're finding the factors doesn't really play an important role. Okay, so let's go here. So 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Oh, and I've got 4 and 3 again, so I've already listed them. I don't want to list them again. So I'm done with my factors, so we didn't use our entire table this time. So now we're going to complete our puzzle. And remember, we're trying to multiply to make negative 12, our product. That's why we're finding factors. And we want to add to make our b term. So we want to add to make a positive 4. So now I've got to look at my factor list. What two numbers will multiply to negative 12 and add to 4? Well, it can't be 1 and 12. Those are way too far apart. And 3 and 4 are only 1 apart. And so that leaves 2 and 6 to be my factors that I'm going to work with. But now I just got to figure out, because my product is negative, one of my values has to be negative. So I've got to pick the correct one, or else I'm not going to get the sum of 4. So now I'm going to go to my calculator. So I'm just going to do 6 plus negative 2, positive 4, or negative 6 plus 2. What do I want my sum to be? Positive 4. So my 2 has to be the number that is negative. So now I know that my like terms are going to have an n with them because I'm trying to add to 4n. So I'm going to put negative 2n in this box and 6n in the top box. And it doesn't matter, you can switch them. It's just going to switch what numbers go here, and that is okay. So now I'm going to use my working backward skills. N times what is going to make negative 2n? Hopefully you said negative 2. And what times n is going to fill in the box for 6n? And that should be a positive 6. And now I'm ready to write my factors, because now I've figured out what makes my rows and what makes my columns, which is what we're trying to get to when we are factoring. And so now I'm going to write my rows as n minus 2 times the sum of n and 6. So my second parentheses, n plus 6. And that product of my factors is going to give me n squared plus 4n minus 12.